Chapter 42 Bhumika. Nowhere in the mahal was safe from the eyes of the Yaksa. Bhumika crossed the corridors, following the light of the moon where it broke into the halls between the thick foliage that wound over the windows, the creepers that hung from the ceiling, as graceful as curtains of silk. She could feel every inch of them, every bit of the life within them, like an extension of herself. And the life, the pulsing, breathing force of it, watched her in turn. In this corridor, if she was still and silent, she could hear the distant noise of the nursery. Sometimes she stood there by the window with her eyes closed and strained to hear a single noise, a laugh or a cry, the sound of her daughter's voice, anything at all. Sometimes, like a cruel joke, one of the Yaksa deigned to allow her a glimpse of Padma through the half-open door or down the end of the corridor, held in their arms. Tonight, she heard footsteps. But no Yaksa emerged, and no Padma. Just Kritika dressed in white, her expression stiff. When she caught sight of Bhumika, she paused, and her expression grew only stiffer. "Elder Bhumika," she said. "Good evening." "Kritika," Bhumika said in return. "Are you better now?" "I was never not well," Kritika said. "The banquet." "I'm going to the Hirana," Kritika cut in. There was something hunted and defiant in her face. She raised her head, chin up, and said, "I am going to pray alongside the Yaksa, whom I worship and trust." Bhumika stared into her face. "Kritika," she said, "please." Kritika began to walk again, quickly, as if she could outrun the banquet. The look on Bhumika's face. "I fought for a better world, Elder Bhumika," she said determinedly. "I will not reject it. I have faith." Bhumika said nothing to that. What could she say? She let Kritika go. Silence fell again. She swallowed hard against the aching lump of grief and anger in her throat and walked onward. She crossed the corridor and slipped from one to the next, making her way into the narrow servants' passages that adjoined the once grand hallways reserved for the nobility. She did not see Sanjana's vibrant face, or Chandni's gentle one, or the gleam of Nandi's silver eyes. She was glad of that. Her people were waiting for her in the kitchens. Bilu was carefully stoking the fire of one of the ovens. When he saw her, he bowed his head in greeting. "They don't care much for flame," Bilu said, adding some fuel to the embers burning low in the oven. "So I thought, I'll get some work done and keep them away while I'm at it. My lady." She nodded. "How is Rook?" This she addressed to Ganam. He was standing on the edge of the circle of servants, the only mask keeper present. The only one, frankly, that Bhumika had felt safe inviting. Kalido was sitting cross-legged on the ground behind him, her head bent as though too heavy for her neck. "Well enough," he said, expression grim. "Doesn't remember his mother's name sometimes. And sometimes he looks at me like he can see right through me. But he's more himself again." She felt helpless relief run through her. Whatever her brother had done to the boy, he had not deserved it, and she was deeply glad that it was a wound he was capable of healing from. "I tried to see Padma again," Kalida said. She sounded subdued, haunted and tired in a way that years of service to the regent and the tumult that had followed his death had never managed to make her be. "They wouldn't let me." "Ah, Kalida," Bhumika breathed. Foolish tears began to build behind her eyes. "Thank you for trying," she said. Every time Bhumika had attempted to go near her daughter, the Yaksa wearing Chandni's face had found her and taken Bhumika's arm lightly, so lightly. Would her dear temple daughter show her the mahal again? Let her touch the fruit trees in the orchard, feel their strength and change them. Would Bhumika take her to the worshippers once more so they could meet the Yaksa and touch Chandni's feet and pray to her as they so desired to? And Bhumika had said yes and yes, obediently yes, and had not seen her daughter. "The feast," she began, then stopped. They stood at or sat around her and watched her, waiting for her to speak. "You know by now what has been done to the highborn who attended the feast," Bhumika said. "The Yaksa have told them they will live if they are obedient. And if they are not, the rot will take them, and the Yaksa have told me that they seek a war. They have told me they desire a new age of flowers. The highborn will now have no choice but to help them." You know, they keep my daughter from me. Kalita let out a low sob. I never imagined the Yaksa returning, Bilu said, from his place by the pots. But if I had, I'd have thought they'd make Ahiranya better, make the world respect us. I'd have thought they'd treat us well. He savagely poked at the flames, firelight running fingers across his face. Seems to me they're no different from the Empire, he said. We've lost one tyrant and gained another. At least they're ours, someone said. Are they? No one told me when I was a boy that the Yaksa I grew up praying to would like sickening people, hurting children, Bilu replied. I would have gone and prayed to the Nameless instead if they had. At least one's not likely to move in and poison the guests. So what do we do? Fight them? How is that going to end? I am not asking you to raise your voices and weapons against them, Bhumika said. Far from it. Are you asking us to obey them? If I wanted to serve them, Ganam said, I'd be sitting with Kritika right now, not you understand, Elder Bhumika. I wouldn't be here of all places with people who barely like me. Even Kritika's not sure if she wants to worship them anymore, said a soldier. As Bilu rightly pointed out, Bhumika said calmly, our people have survived oppression and mistreatment before. We know we have the strength to do so if we must. But we shouldn't have to again, one of the maids said. Her voice trembled. Haven't we suffered enough? It isn't fair, someone else said. More voices clamored up, rising and tripping over one another. There was a thud. Bhumika turned and saw that Jivan had knocked his saber pommel hard against the wall, making a noise loud enough to silence them. Elder Bhumika, he said, you were saying. It isn't fair, Bhumika said, and I am grief-stricken. I had so many hopes for Ahiranya, as you all did, I know. But I also have faith in all of you. I have faith you will survive. I have faith you can bend to monstrous forces and still hold pride in your hearts. And I know if the opportunity arises, you will set yourselves free. And you? Ganam asked, eyes on her assessing. What will you do, Elder Bhumika? Lead their wars for them? She would do whatever they asked of her, but only what they asked of her. She would weave her way around their orders, finding hairline fractures in their control, weakening their grip on Ahiranya and its people. She would do what she had always done, play at obedience, while ever sharpening her knives, waiting for a chance, only a chance. The thought made her want to wither. She understood their frustration, their hopelessness. It was hers, too. I will remember what we are, she said. I will keep the thought alight in my heart like a candle. And when our lives darken, I will use it to guide me through. I will remember that we are not what is done to us. We are and always have been more than that. Her voice softened as they stared back at her, grief and rage and something like hope in their faces. That is what I will do. We will not die bravely and needlessly, she said, but we will not lose hope. That is what it means to be Ahiranyi, whether the Yaksa know it or not. When they destroy us, somehow, we will always grow anew. Have faith in that. She felt Ashok before she saw him. The grain sang and writhed in her head, a warning and a call. And there he was, waiting for her beyond the kitchen courtyard. Keep the others in the kitchen, she said softly to Jivan. Keep them safe. He hesitated, clearly unwilling to leave her alone, but at her urging he abruptly nodded and walked away. The spirit wearing her brother's face wavered on his feet, stood on the dusty ground of the yard and looked at her with her brother's sullen eyes, always displeased, always demanding more than she could give. She stared back. I heard you talking, he said, to the others. Then you know I counsel obedience. There is a tale I want to tell you, he said. His voice echoed through the dark. A child's tale, though you won't find the whole of it in any book, only fragments. That did not sound like Ashok's voice. Tell me, she said. Once, he replied, there was a Yaksa who came after Mani Ara to this world. Like her, he made himself part of Ahiranya. He became a green thing, flowers in him. But it was humans he loved best. He took in orphans. He raised them like his own. But mortals were so lonely by nature, he said. His kind, his Yaxakin, were bound together by the waters, could feel each other, could share dreams and feelings, thoughts. Mortals had no such skill, so he decided to give it to them. To have magic you have to sacrifice something. He taught them that, told them when they drank the waters they would have to give something up, hollow themselves to make room for it. They chose to do it. He created a temple to train them. He led them to the waters and let them take the waters up. Those that lived were bound to the Yaksa, sharing their magic, their memories, their hearts. Those that died he kept for himself. Beloved masks. He touched a finger to his own face. This is not a child's tale, said Bhumika. A story about children, he said, not for them, perhaps. Though it shaped them, it shaped you. Why tell me this? The Yaksa had a secret. He never told any of his kin, said Ashok. He hid it from them for a long time, but he loved one child dearly, more than all the rest. She loved knowledge more than any other child he had met, and he gave her a surfeit of it. He told her everything he had taught the other children, his temple children, and when she passed through the waters, he gave her even more. Every secret the Yaksa had, but on her third journey through the waters, she nearly died. She came back alive, but the waters were poisoning her. She wouldn't live, bound to them as she was, and he could not stand to see her die, even if her shadow would remain with him forever. Bhumika listened, saying nothing. Somewhere behind her she could hear the spit and crackle of kitchen fires. The cold of the courtyard, the night, was settling in her bones. She could not live with the waters, he said, so he tore her free from them. Tore her free. She thought of the scroll in the library, the body with roots running through it. Not roots, perhaps, after all, but rivers of gold and green and red. Rivers of heart's blood. Rivers of soul and living. And what, Bhumika asked, throat tight, became of her? She had hollowed herself for the deathless waters, he said, for their magic. What remained of her after was the shadow of a girl, magic lost, memories in fragments. She was herself, but not herself at all. She remembered everything he had taught her, every tale, every secret, but she did not remember who she was. Ashok took a step closer. His movements were jerky, as if he didn't know his own limbs. He bound her again to the waters in the end. He couldn't stand to see her as she was. He couldn't stand not to feel her soul in the waters with him. Bhumika, Ashok's voice, familiar, a little rough, panic woven through it. I heard you, and here I am, you see. I don't have long, but I have what you need. You want our people to be free, and I have the knowledge that will let you free them. I have so much knowledge inside me, knowledge I'm afraid to touch. I am not myself. He sucked in a breath. You know what I am, but you, Bhumika, you're a temple daughter. You are bound to the Yaksa, bound to me. Her not brother looked at her. One of his eyes was mortal, gleaming with tears. The other was living wood scraped bare, green and weeping sap. I can give you what he gave those children, said Ashok, who was not Ashok. I can give you all the secrets of the Yaksa. I can give you the tools to destroy them, and then I can set you free. All it will cost you is myself, whispered Bhumika. My memories. Is that what you mean? Yes, only that. Ashok, are you utterly mad? I tested the skill on Rook. He is not thrice-born, not a temple child, but he had the waters in him, through his rot. I know it will work. His voice changed a little again, deepened a fracture of wood rippling across his cheek. I owe it to you, child, he said. I made you, after all. A groan of pain, his head tilted forward. She could have held him, could have raised his face with her hands and looked at him and allowed herself to fear for him, worry for him. What is wrong with you? What has become of you? Could have, but did not. She thought of all the Yaksa had done in the feast, the bodies sundered by striations of wood and Ashok's lost, frightened eyes, and stood where she was, as unmoving as the oldest tree, deep-rooted and steadfast. "Why now?" she asked instead, when he raised his head. "Why offer me a weapon now?" Because Ashok wanted a better Ahiranya," he said. "Because Ashok had a dream he died for, and this is not what he dreamt of. Because at the feast I thought I would weep with horror at whatever is mortal in me hates what the Yaksa have done, and what is Yaksa in me knows that we will do, and it fears it. The Yaksa are not the only ones who want to shape this world." Ashok was sweating, strange pearls of sap running down his face. "We do not want a war. We know war is inevitable. Even as we have begun to return, to make the sacrifices necessary to crawl back into this world, others have been awakening too. See the messages in names and prophecies, teaching mortals the secrets of sacrifice. They've written those secrets into the blood, the bone, the earth, just as we have. But we'll be stronger this time. We've given up so much more than they have. This time we'll take the world entirely, hollow it, and make it home. But we can be stopped. We know it, and we fear it, because losing will destroy us." "Ashok," she made her voice a whip, hard enough to crack through the glazed look in his eyes. He blinked then, looking at her, and she pressed on, trying to keep him present with her. "Please, talk to me. Explain. What would you have me do?" He blinked at her with his one mortal eye. "Ashok," he repeated. "I am not Ashok any more. Not really. Am I?" "You are still Ashok," she said with conviction she did not feel. "You saved our sister when our siblings burned. You kept her alive, then you gave her to me. You have died before, and you came back. Died with our siblings. Died when you let Priya go. You can come back again. You have." "That wasn't death," he rasped. "You don't know what death is like. True death is something unlike anything else. I was picked to pieces, scraped clean, the bones of me reassembled into something of use to them, to me." He took a step closer to her. "Bhumika," he forced out, "I am a Yaksa, no different from the one who wears Chandni in her smile or uses Sanjana's voice. No different, although I believe I am." "You are still you," she said, but saw her own uncertainty mirrored in his face. "I am only the scraps of myself, the tatters. Take this armor apart, this thin skin, and I won't be Ashok anymore. I know it. The Yaksa know it. They don't know why I cling on, but it makes them curious. They're waiting to see what will happen. They think it's funny. You always loved humans, they told me, and I did. Maybe I still do." Bhumika felt the thud of her own heart, painful as a fist. "You are a temple elder," he said, "bound to us by choice and sacrifice, bound by a Yaksa's choice. We can give you so many things. We have given you so many things. Strength, power, the earth and plants at your bidding. And I can give you more. I can give you knowledge, Bhumika. The kind of knowledge that could kill us in the right hands. A secret that can be forged into a weapon. Is losing yourself not worth that price?" What capacity did she have to do anything with that kind of knowledge? What could she possibly accomplish? To know the right knife for a task was one thing. To actually be able to wield it was another matter entirely. And yet her hands shook and her voice trembled as she said, "If I take this knowledge with me, I can stop the war." "You can try," said Ashok, "and that is more than you can do now. You're bound. Good is chained. This is all I can offer you. If you know how the Yaksa can be stopped, if you feel guilt, why will you not act to stop the war yourself? Why must it be me?" "Because it is only the part of me that is Ashok that wants to," he said. "This skin of me." He gestured helplessly at his own body. "And I am not going to be here much longer, Bhumika. You must see it. I am fraying. I cannot leave, but you can, for a price." She closed her eyes, searching for calm. "Everything demands sacrifice." "Of course," she said. "Of course it does." "You've forgotten, but once beneath the waters the Yaksa offered you a blade of sacred wood. It told you to cut out your heart for it, and you did." His voice was quiet but deep. Ashok's voice, but also not quite. Not quite. You made space for the Sangam inside you. The rivers are in you, flowing through you. We can find you anywhere because you carry the waters. We can live in you because you carry the waters. But if you are not bound to the waters—" "I understand," she said, closed her eyes one brief moment, then opened them. "A typical Ashok strategy," she said tiredly, "to risk my health and my life, and all those who rely upon me, for the slimmest chance of success. When I risked death, I did it for the higher cause," he said. "Our autonomy, our freedom. Risk is not shameful." "Shame! You talk of shame. You wanted to return to our glorious past," she said, with all the savagery she had never been able to direct at him when he was living. That he had denied her by being her enemy, then denied her by dying and leaving both her and Priya behind. "What do you think of it, now that we have it?" "I think you're asking a ghost about wanting to resurrect ghosts, sister," he said with a weight and quietness she never heard from her brother's lips. "I am not real anymore, Bhumika," he said. "What I once wanted doesn't matter, but you are real, and the choice is yours." "You want to give me knowledge forbidden to me," Bhumika said, closing her eyes, feeling the night press against them. She was burning inside. This was not magic, not the fire of sacred wood. This was how panic felt. This was how it felt to have the walls close in. This was how she had felt in the moments before she had passed through the deathless waters as a girl, all her choices narrowing and the air in her lungs with them. "You want to risk all that I am on the vague hope that someone may be able to use the knowledge I have." "Yes." "And my alternative?" "You stay here," Ashok said. "You play the coward's game like you always have. You play nicely with your masters as you always have." "I stay with my child," said Bhumika. "I stay with the people I've promised to protect. I do not abandon them for vague hopes." "Ah, Bhumika," said Ashok, "you think we'll ever give your baby back to you? You think she will survive if I leave her? You think she will survive if you stay?" "You're saying this to sway me," she said tightly. "I'm telling you what you already know. We were trained to cut out our weaknesses for a reason." He shrugged, a sound that creaked like wood in high wind. "You created a weakness, Bhumika. Brought your weakness into the world. Every time you fail the Yaksa, they'll use her against you, and they'll blame you for being foolish enough to leave her there for them to take. And one day they will destroy her, whether by accident or design." "They've always let children die," he said. "It's what shaped us, after all. How many temple children do you think were lost to them?" He was manipulating her. She knew. She knew. And yet, would she do more good here, defending her home and her people, soothing the Yaksa honeyed words and worship? Surely she would. It was the path she had always taken. Perhaps she would come to love them again, feel faith in them well up in her. She'd come up to love her husband. The lie of it had carried through the years, until it had not. But her husband had never known her heart, and the Yaksa held hers in their hands. She'd given them her heart, torn it out herself. She'd made herself their creature in return for power, and they had Padma, her child, the compass of her heart. The walls were closing in upon her tighter, tighter. "This opportunity won't last for long," said Ashok. "Because you won't." "Yes." She squeezed her hands into fists, hard enough for her fingers ached. "Can you protect her when I'm gone?" Bhumika asked, and felt wretched. How could she ask this? How could she consider this? "Can you keep my little one safe?" "She's a child, Ashok. We deserved a great deal too," Ashok said. "They burned us anyway, the people who should have loved us. And you think I want to visit that kind of grief on her too? No, Ashok. I'll do it if you can promise me her life." "You have no way to hold me to that promise," he said. "I have no way to hold me to that promise. You once saved our sister's life, when she was small. When she was afraid, you carried her." She looked at him. "And the Yaksa you spoke of loved children, children like my own. Ghost or not, fading or not, you won't leave my daughter, will you?" He looked back at her. Something flickered over his face, something soft and wounded that reminded her of the boy he'd been before their siblings burned. "I'll try," he said. That's all I can vow." She nodded. She couldn't thank him. She hated. "Why did you have to die?" Bhumika's voice broke, and she hated it. How small losing all her allies had made her. Hated that her greatest strengths, her love for her own people, her love for what little family she coddled together, for the responsibility for the future for her child, had been turned upon her. Why did I have to be left to carry the burden alone? Ashok hesitated, raised the hand as if he would reach for her. It hovered for a moment, then slowly lowered. "Because I made bad choices," said Ashok. "Because bad choices were made by the people who raised me, and the people who raised them, and the immortals who built our world. Because we are small and disposable, Bhumika, every one of us, and it was just your luck to make it longer than the rest of us. Of course you only admit how bad your choices were now that you're gone," Bhumika said with a laugh that was also grief. "Of course." She forced her hands to loosen, forced herself not to sway on her feet or crumple. Strong roots, deep roots, holding her fast. "When will we do it?" "Meet me at the Bower of Bones," Ashok said, "before dawn." "Are you giving me time to say goodbye?" "If you need it," he said. "Time to prepare." And then he turned and walked away from her. She watched him go, the bend of his spine, the shape of him. A shell, a skin, for a Yaksa she did not know. She turned back. Jivan stood in the doorway. He was a shadow far back enough that she could only see a gleam of his eyes. "You listen to everything." Jivan gave one jerky nod. He said nothing. "I have never been the impetuous one," she said. "I don't like foolish risks. I know better. I have worked so hard, Jivan, to ensure I am strong enough to find a way through for all of us. This is not what I want." "My lady," he said, "I will go with you." "To the Bower of Bones?" "Anywhere," he said. Her heart ached. "No debt you owe me demands this of you, and my daughter—" "I don't do it for debt," he said, mouth firm. "I cannot protect her. Against them I am powerless. But you, perhaps." She wanted to refuse him, wanted to spare him this, but if she was going to lose herself, she could not do this alone. She did not want to do this alone. "Perhaps," she echoed. "Well then, if you like, yes, you may."